Može. Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the presentation of our research, Non-Malign Influence, what does the Russian community in Serbia think and do? And without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Cameron to welcome you all.
Now I know you're all here to hear me speak instead of the research, so I promise I'll only talk for probably 2 or 3 hours. No, kidding. Thank you so much, Srđan. Look, first of all, I'm thrilled to be here with you all, excuse me, today, and particularly to highlight that Canada is here and supporting civil society in Serbia. And if you allow me to stand on my soapbox for a little bit, I don't have to tell you the importance of civil society organizations, so sorry, in Serbia or in the world. I've worked with civil society organizations around the world, Mali, Burkina Faso, Caribbean, Afghanistan, Iraq, Turkey, and wherever you go, when there is a rich civil society organization or ecosystem, that's when you have the best public policy. That's when you have change. I really appreciate CSOs and their ability to work independently and represent the other side of the story. So sorry, I'm trying not to cough here. And the interests of people and the citizens. What's really impressed myself, and I dare say many in this room, is the work of the Belgrade Centre for Security Policy. In this time when you have misinformation, disinformation, where if you look around, just like noses, everybody has an opinion, okay? We need to cut through that. We need research-based, evidence-based picture, analysis, recommendations, and that's where BCSP comes in and where they really shine. As we approach the 3rd anniversary of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, and I'll underscore illegal invasion, and as we hopefully head towards just, comprehensive, and lasting peace in Ukraine, the topic of Russian communities, the diaspora, and particularly those that left at the beginning of the illegal invasion, it's a very topical subject. We hear analysis, opinions, editorials on what those Russian communities mean, where they land. We also see what the Russian community in Serbia, we see these editorials, what they think, what they're going to do. Sometimes it's a positive view, sometimes a negative. But like I said before, we can't rely on opinions, rhetoric, random theories. We need research. BCSP is helping us all to get beyond these headlines, beyond the anecdotes, beyond the rhetoric, beyond the co-opting the message for different purposes, and to present an accurate portrait of Russian communities in their complexity, in their differences, where they are together and homogeneous, and where they are not. With this, they will facilitate and encourage a nuanced thinking, understanding, analysis, and hopefully inform public policy as challenges and opportunities are identified. Before I pass the floor so that we actually hear about this wonderful research and see how we can understand the Russian community and what that means for Serbia and the region, and maybe Russia itself, I just wanted to highlight how much I personally, but also Canada and the international community appreciates the dedication and diligent efforts of BCSP in advancing the security of the people here in Serbia. Canada will continue to support the civil society sector in Serbia, as these are the organizations that strive practically for a better world for the citizens, that are independent and help enrich public policy, and that roll up their sleeves and do stuff. And let's be clear, that hasn't been easy the last couple of months here. So I applaud, salute, and bow, quite frankly, to the civil society organizations, specifically BCSP. So here we are, there you are, there we all are, the kind of citizens and organizations that this country is lucky to have. So I will end there. I have threatened to give a 3-hour interpretive dance on the subject, but I won't. Instead, let's hear about the exciting research from BCSP.
Good afternoon, everyone, from my side as well. Before proceeding with the presentation of our research results, I would like to express our gratitude to TMG Insights, which is part of the Cantor International Market Research Company that supported us in conducting this research. Our research methodology was combining quantitative survey at the first stage with 300 Russian nationals that came to Serbia after the war in Ukraine started. Considering the size and the concentration of Russian people in Serbia, mostly in Belgrade and Novi Sad, this is a fairly representative sample. At the second stage, we conducted qualitative, in-depth, semi-structured interviews with those Russians who wanted to share more. However, qualitative interviews and the quantitative survey was just one of the main components of our research, since we also wanted to try to estimate the number of Russians currently residing in Serbia, considering the fact that there are different estimations currently present in the media. In that regard, the Belgrade Centre for Security Policy submitted 2 Freedom of Information requests to the Serbian Border Police Administration. And today we share with you the data that we got from them. Namely, what we see is the increase of the applications for the temporary residence permit in Serbia, submitted by Russians over time, and peaking in 2024. However, in analyzing this graph, we should also take into account that the number of rejections of the approvals of the temporary residence permit is much higher in 2024 comparing to the 2 previous years. On the next slide, we see another type of data that we got from the Serbian Border Police Administration, and it reflects the residence registrations by Russian nationals over time. We also see the increase, and in total, we got the result of more than 950,000 registrations. However, this is just a gross amount, and it does not reflect the total number, the real number of Russians being present here, because residence registration is done every time one individual enters Serbia. As we know, there is a visa-free regime between Russia and Serbia as of 2009, and many Russians benefit on it, leaving the country after 30 days of staying in. In total, we can say that based on these 2 types of data and additionally the tourist arrivals that we got from e-tourist portal and published by the Statistical Office of the Republic of Serbia, our estimation is that currently we have between 80,000 and 110,000 Russians in the country. Now we proceed with the presentation of our sample demography. What we see on this slide is that the majority of Russians that came to Serbia are young people in the age category between 28 and 39 years. I would also like to add here that these people are mostly highly educated with university diplomas, and the research also showed that they are mostly self-employed people. On the next slide, we ask the question, who did you come to Serbia with? And what we see is that the majority of them came with a partner or a family member. Much lower amount came alone. Now I give the floor to Srđan.
Hvala, Kristina. So we also asked the Russians for the reasons why did they leave Russia. And as you see on this slide, security reasons are dominant, but also political and economic reasons were present in motivating them to come. Excuse me. We also asked them why did they choose specifically Serbia and not some other country. And as you can see here, the dominant reason was the favorable visa policy for Russians. So the agreement that Kristina was mentioning from 2009. But also language and cultural similarity and generally positive attitudes towards the Russians in this country were also a reason for attracting them to Serbia. Now, a vast majority of Russians feels safe in Serbia, as you can see here, almost 97%. And this comes with a caveat on what they do in Serbia, or their perception of what they do and what will happen to them if they make certain decisions. But we will come to that later. I'll keep it for now. And also, we asked them to evaluate their linkage with their home country if they have been going back to Russia since they arrived to Serbia. And you can see that almost 65% of them didn't. A smaller percentage went once, and the 15% is going to Russia back and forth. Out of those who decided not to go back to Russia, we can see that the feeling of unsafety in Russia is the predominant reason for that. But also travel barriers are also a reason that hampers their decision to go back to Russia once in a while. As you know, the plane tickets to Russia are quite expensive from Serbia, since this is probably one of the few, if not the only destination in Europe where they can actually fly to. So it's also used a lot as a logistical hub, not only to come to Serbia. We also asked them if they had visits from their family and friends from Russia since they arrived. And you can see that a small majority did have, but that almost 50% didn't have even this, which further underlines their detachment from their home country. On the plans to move back to Russia, I think 30%, as you can see, decidedly say no. They do not intend to go back. We have the majority that is undecided, and a small minority of 13.5% that would move back to Russia. And what would be the reasons that would motivate those that are undecided to go back to Russia? You can see that this is a primary condition would be the end of the war in Ukraine. And the second one is regime change. So the change of the regime of Vladimir Putin in Moscow. And this is probably one of the most surprising for us at least, results of this research, because generally there was this intuitive impression, but just by seeing the Russians, that they're this progressive community here in Serbia, at least in majority. But we probably influenced by the migration crisis from 2015 and 2016, we thought that they see Serbia only as a transit point on their way to some EU country or further away to another Western country. And we can see that this was a huge misperception, because 40% of them answered that in the next 5 years at least, they see themselves in Serbia. Now I give the floor again to Kristina.
Thank you. As a part of our research, we also wanted to investigate the political attitudes of Russians being present in Serbia. And I would like to express our gratitude to Levada Center from Russia, independent research center, that shared with us some of the results that they got from their regular research polls, and we were able this way to compare them. So the first question among these that we asked was to assess the political direction of Russia today. And what we see on this graph is the difference between Russians who stayed and those who came, namely much higher positive assessment exists among Russians in Russia than those in Serbia who mostly assess the situation as the wrong direction. However, we also can see the high percentage of Russians who avoid to reply to this question. This is also the case with the questions about Putin and Ukraine, which are the topics that Russians mostly consider as highly politically sensitive and most probably are afraid to reply to them. Here you see the question about approval and disapproval of Vladimir Putin's activities as the president of Russia. Again, we notice the similar logic. Much higher approval exists among Russians who stayed in the country than those who came, but we also consider this no response as a high percentage of people who chose this option. This question is very important, so we consider it based on the age categories. And what we see is that in Russia, among all age categories, there is a high approval of Vladimir Putin. In Serbia, much lower approval. We notice higher approval among people that are 40 and older, but again, one of the differences is that much more Russians in Serbia choose not to respond to this question comparing to the Russians in Russia. Here, I would also like to make a short digression. We compared the question about approval or disapproval of Vladimir Putin with the assessment of the political situation in Serbia by Russians present here. And what we noticed is that among the Putin's supporters, there is a much higher positive assessment of the situation in Serbia comparing to the Putin's opponents, where the approval and the positive assessment of the situation is much lower. On the next slide, you see that we also asked the question about Ukraine. Do you personally support the actions of Russian armed forces there? And we see also much higher approval among Russians living in Russia than in Serbia. Also, high percentage finds this difficult to answer. In analyzing this question, please, we should also take into account that 41% of Russians in Serbia said that they do not follow the situation in Ukraine carefully. And on the next slide, you see also that we asked the question about the media sources that Russian community in Serbia mostly uses. We see that the results are rather divided, but mostly present are international news and media outlets, and still they rely on the Russian news. Serbian news, there is the lowest amount. We compared in this table the attitude towards the support of the Russian armed forces in Ukraine, and also the kind of sources that they use to inform themselves. And what we see is that the highest support for the Russian armed forces is among those readers of the Russian news. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristina. Back in September last year, Romanian stand-up comedian Victor Patrescan referred to Russians in Serbia as Coca-Cola refugees. Basically, he sarcastically pointed out during that show that they came to Serbia for moral reasons. Because, and the line of the joke was, they didn't come to Serbia in 2008 when Putin invaded Georgia. They didn't come to Serbia in 2014 when he first time attacked Ukraine, neither in 2015 when he intervened in Syria, but in 2022, and I quote him, when you cannot order stuff on Amazon, then the morals kicks in. So I think this fairly unfair representation of the Russian community in Serbia does exemplify one interesting finding that we were able to discover through this opinion poll, which is that as many as 73% of Russians in Serbia have never been involved in any form of political or civic activities after leaving Russia. I think there are basically two reasons for this. One is that we were also able to find out that they don't really understand Serbian politics. So if you leave aside the, the protests against the aggression on Ukraine, all the other kind of manifestations, they don't really completely know what's going on. But I think the predominant reason, and we were able also to get the confirmation on this from the deep interviews, is the fear of being deported if they do engage politically. So the fear of the long arm of the Kremlin in Serbia and of the Serbian security services, because we know that several Russians were deported because of their political activity here. And what we were also able to find out in our Freedom of Information requests, that the number of rejections of temporary resident permit demands by Russians in 2004 rose by 400%. Now, the Serbian authorities do not give the reason why they reject somebody's demand for temporary residence, but you can think that this has something to do with it. So I think, to end this, I think Russians in Serbia, like any immigrant community in the world, when they relocate to a certain country, at least initially, they tend to favor their safety, economic well-being over any form of political activism. But I think we will go now with the panel discussion to go into depth in all of these things that we presented now. So thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, welcome to our panel discussion. I'm Radina Vučetić. I'm professor of history, of contemporary history at Faculty of Philosophy, University of Belgrade. And I will use my first sentence, this sentence, to express my support for students and their demands, and I would ask for your support as well. I'm teaching various courses at the Faculty of Philosophy, but for this research, I think that it is important that I'm teaching propaganda, soft power, and Cold War. And I was usually working and researching American soft power, but since the beginning of Russia's aggressions against Ukraine, I have also been studying contemporary Russian propaganda in Serbia and in the region. So it is really great pleasure for me to be in this panel and to moderate it, as the research findings answer questions that have remained really open since 2022 and the first major influx of Russian refugees to Serbia. And the most important question, I think, is how well do we really know each other, and what do Russian immigrants think about Serbia, Russian and Serbian politics, and the war in Ukraine? And today I will at first tell you a little bit about our panelists today. They are Srđan Cvijić, Maxim Samorukov, and Margarita Zavadskaya. Hi, Margarita. Srđan Cvijić, you already know him, but I have to read because it's polite and good to know something more. Srđan Cvijić is the president of the International Advisory Committee of the Belgrade Centre for Security Policy. Before this position, he was a senior policy officer at the Europe and Eurasia program of the Open Society Foundations. He is a member of the Balkans in Europe Policy Advisory Group, a senior associate research fellow of the Italian Institute for International Political Studies, and a fellow of the Europe's Futures program of the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna. He is also a former high-ranking Serbian diplomat. He also worked for the Stability Pact for Southeastern Europe, and he holds a PhD from the Department of Law of the European University Institute in Florence. Maxim Samorukov, he is fellow at the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Centre, and his research is focused on Russia's relations with the states of Central, Eastern, and Southeastern Europe, and, which is also important, from 2015 till 2022, he was a fellow at the Carnegie Moscow Center based in Russia until the Russian authorities closed down the center. And after leaving Russia, he was one of these people, Russian immigrant in Belgrade. He spent 2022 and 2023 in Serbia, conducting his research as a non-resident fellow at Belgrade Centre for Security Policy. And we have Margarita Zavadskaya online. She's a senior research fellow at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, researcher and lecturer at the Envoy Conference. She studies political behavior, authoritarianism, and public opinion in Russia and post-Soviet states. She leads a proper panel study and co-leads the Russia Anti-War Commons project. She has published widely on protest movements, electoral manipulation, and regime resilience. She holds a PhD in political science, again, European University Institute in Florence, maybe it says something about this institute, and works on comparative projects on autocratic governance, using survey experiments, political exile studies, and computational methods to analyze authoritarian stability and change. How is this going to be? We're going to have 3 rounds. I will give a short introduction, and then you will have around half an hour for questions and answers. I will start with the title of the study, Non-Malign Influence. What does the Russian community in Serbia think and do? Because in recent years, research and various studies have mostly focused on Russian malign influence, and when you start researching, this is the case. So this is something different, and but the fact is that we know almost nothing about Russian immigrants who, for the second time in 100 years, are coming to this region in tens of thousands. So we have no idea till now what their influence is. And I will, because I'm a historian, I would just like to give you very, very short parallel with what happened 100 years ago, because between 30,000 and 44,000 Russians arrived in the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. 10,000 of them lived in Belgrade, and it was 1/10 of Belgrade population. In terms of age structure, the majority immigrants belong to working age population between 20 and 50. 44.19 was between 20 and 30 years old, just like here, young population. And by the early 30s, about half of the Russian immigrants were between 30 and 40 years old, and nearly 3/4, around 75% of Russian immigrants were between 20 and 40 years old. One more thing. The majority of these refugees were intellectuals. They played a really crucial role in developing of Belgrade University, of opera, ballet, architecture, but they largely remained a parallel community with limited integration. So these are some parallels, and in the end, let's go back to present, and not only as a historian, but also as a person who lives in Vračar. And Vračar is a municipality where a large number of Russians have settled, and I encountered them daily. I walk my dog at least 2 times a day. So of course, I often ask myself, what do they think? Do they support Putin? Do they support Russian aggression in Ukraine? Is this young guy a young IT member or maybe FSB agent? We all have this kind of thoughts, and I think that's the reason why is this research very, very important. So the first round of this conversation goes around the question of what we know about each other, and do we understand Russian community better after this research about what they think, about their attitudes on various topics. And I will start with Srđan, because Kristina mentioned a number, but I think that it again remained unclear. There is always this thing with numbers. In media, you can find numbers between 100,000 and 200,000. And even for Kingdom of Yugoslavia, there was no precise number. So at first, let's start with that again. And then a related question, what surprised you the most in this survey, or rather in these results? And do we know now Russians better?
Thank you, Radina. I think in late 2022, somebody also did the FOIA request to the, I think, to the Ministry of Internal Affairs at large. We specifically asked the border police that has this data, and there was this answer that 220,000 Russians came to Serbia, and then all the media started writing from 2023 onwards that there are 220,000 Russians at this point in Serbia. And this was wrong at that point, because we know for sure that this was wrong. And I will come back to the real number, because what was this figure is just the number of entries. So when a foreign citizen comes to Serbia, you have 24 hours to declare your residence. Sometimes the hotel does it for you, Airbnb booking, but in theory, you should do it yourself. And so if Maxim goes to Berlin and then he goes to Montenegro and he comes back, every time the Maxim is counted once more. So this is this figure. And we also had in conversations with the police officers who talked on the background, they referred to this figure as the gross amount, how they call it, brutto broj. It sounds awkward when you talk about people, but basically, so by the end of 2024, this gross amount was 950,000, almost 948,000 and some. This doesn't mean that there are so many people in Serbia, but it does mean that Serbia is like a huge airport for Russians, or a huge meeting place from Russians, because this is where Russians from all over Europe can meet their parents, family, if they so. You also have this dynamic, not only the people who are living here. The figure that offers a closer, number is the number of these approved residency permits. The approved residency permits by the end of 2024 are 67,000 and some. There were 73,000 demands, but as we explained, there were quite a number of rejections in the last year, more than 1,400, which is by 400%. Again, I repeat, more than in 2023 and 2022. So, but then this is not all the picture, because you also have Russians who do not demand residency permits, but because they can stay here in this very lax visa regime, they're, how we refer to it, on the visa run. It means that, you know, every 30 days, they leave the country and they come back and they renew their right to stay in Serbia as tourists. So by this, we estimated that the number is from 80 to 110,000, but we cannot say for sure how big is this number, because we would also have to qualify, like, who are Russians living in Serbia. We, you know, in our poll, we basically included people who are here for at least a month, you know, but, you know, it may be that some people stay a couple of months and then they go somewhere else. So we don't have these figures, like the Kingdom of Yugoslavia didn't. Yeah. Neither did we asked the police many other questions. We didn't get the reply. We assume also because they simply do not have these figures.
And what surprised you most?
Well, I think, and maybe we can talk more about it, but I think it's just their determination to stay in this country. That was the biggest surprise. Yes.
So we can decide. Okay, Maxim, you were a peer reviewer of this publication, but you have also, as I said, personal experience of being here. So from your perspective, is there any surprise with these results, and was it what you expected?
There were quite a few surprises, okay. Yes, for me. First of all, the sheer number of Russians in Serbia, because I was much more skeptical before this research was conducted. I saw all these articles about 200,000 Russians, 300,000 Russians, but I perfectly knew that I personally, for example, have around a dozen of belly carton, and each of these belly carton is counted as a separate Russian. But still, if we take our most conservative estimate, cleaned of all this double count, you get at least 80,000 or almost 100,000 people, and we also get that 85% of them are living in Belgrade, which makes them probably like as 100 years ago, like 10% of a Belgrade population, maybe 8%, but still a very huge community and also a very homogeneous community. If we look at the responses, many questions, you get 60% the same opinion. You get 70% the same opinion. So this community is quite single-minded. There is a clear majority with these democratic, anti-Putinist convictions, which wants to live, which are not probably that much politicized, but still have strong political ideas, and which is afraid to interact with the current regime because of fear of being deported or getting into trouble, but actually is politically quite literate. They know what politics is, and they are ready to be involved as soon as they get a safer status here. Another surprise is what Srđan already said, that so many of them want to stay here for longer, because we got 40% who say it clearly that they plan to do that, and another 30% who say they don't know yet, but we can assume that if they don't know, they'll probably do what they're doing now, and they're staying here. So it will be more than half of this community is likely to stay here. And given how short is the time frame required in Serbia to get a citizenship, it means that many of these people will start massively getting Serbian citizenship within a time frame of 2 years. And some of them, I have friends here, if there is intermarriage, which there are intermarriages between Serb citizens and Russians, you can get a citizenship in 3 years. I have friends who are already preparing to apply for the citizenship this spring. And in 2 years, it will be a massive stream because 5 years, almost everybody will get eligible to get Serbian citizenship. And it's very interesting to try to predict how they're going to behave in Serbian politics. This community, which will be quite young, well-educated, concentrated in the capital, and we politically literate. Yeah? And judging by their values, what we see in questions like only 12% of them support Putin. Clearly, most of others oppose. Only like 7 or 8% of them support Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Only 5% are opposing democratic reforms. So it's it could be a clearly strong pro-European community, potentially a constituency for Serbian pro-democratic, pro-EU opposition. But on the other hand, these communities, this Russian community is still very concerned about the dangers the success of democratization and European integration in Serbia may bring to them personally. Because under current conditions, if Serbia gets closer to the European Union, it means they can be canceled direct flights. It means that the visa regime may be imposed for Russian citizens. And even if they personally have already Serbian citizenship, their relatives and friends from Russia will no longer be able to visit them here. And we see that more than a half are still interacting with Russians here. And also, these like small problems, and also they are not sure that actually their status here may be in danger because of all the limitations which are imposed on Russian citizens in other EU countries. Yeah? Now they have chosen Serbia because they feel that here Russian passport is not a problem. But if Serbia gets into the European Union, Russian passport may become a problem. So we get a paradox, a pro-European community, which is supporting having a European Serbia in terms of values, but is somewhat afraid of getting a European Serbia inside the European Union.
Thank you. Margarita, hi. How do these results compare to the Russian diaspora elsewhere, given that you have done field work and have experience working on Russia diaspora in other countries? And what are similarities, differences, and also is there any surprise with these results?
First of all, thank you so much. I really hope that you can hear me and see me. It's a great pleasure, and I really appreciate. I know all the pain of conducting this kind of surveys and polls, and also combining them with the qualitative information. We did it for at least 6 countries, and since people were moving around, I mean Russians, after February 22, so we ended up covering more than 35 countries. And obviously Serbia being one of the main destinations, although it hasn't been it wasn't the primary destination for the majority of Russian immigrants. It was probably like a second choice, or people landed there after spending a while in Armenia, Georgia, or in Turkey or elsewhere. So let me just continue what Maxim was talking about. So again, it's extremely fascinating. Well, first of all, these findings resonate with research on other Russian diasporas elsewhere. I primarily focus on South Caucasus, Central Asia, and Finland, especially where I live. I'm a proud dual national. So yes, speaking of Russian passport being a problem, so Finland is very well known probably for even attempts to sort of post hoc. It became even an issue at the presidential elections a year ago, where the Russian nationals who also have a luxury of Finnish nationality have to forcefully renounce their Russian passports, and Russian embassies just stopped accepting all the applications. So, which also caused a lot of turmoil here in a small country, just 6 million people, and also with a tangible presence of Russian population, given the closeness of the country and shared border, and also repatriates from Karelia, from St. Petersburg, and elsewhere. Okay, going back to the numbers. So let me begin with the broader patterns. So across various host countries, whether in the EU, Georgia, Armenia, or Central Asia, Russian immigrants tend to be highly educated, predominantly liberal, and strongly opposed to the war. So here, actually, we don't see any major differences. And this holds true in Serbia as well. However, one of the most striking continuities across different Russian diaspora communities is political disengagement. What I found very striking in your report is that striking number, 72.8% of Russian migrants who avoid political participation. It's pretty dramatic difference compared vis-a-vis other countries. So we also did some field work in Serbia. We have about 108 semi-structured interviews. Also field work conducted by my colleague 1 year ago. And we also have survey data, but our survey data were composed a little bit differently. So if you relied on you try to achieve representation based on the statistical data you have, and Serbia is likely to have at least something to rely on. So some countries like Armenia, for example, they don't really even have proper statistics. How do we account for Russian incomers? So which proved to be an enormous methodological problem. So I'm very happy that you were able to avoid it or bypass it one way or another. So our study was mostly just, we're looking at the Russian migrants from the perspective of Russian migrants who were just, spreading across different countries. So in this sense, it's not represented from the whole society point of view, but it's quite, we covered more than 12,000 respondents. So we have a pretty decent share of and understanding what's going on within the Russian transnational community. So this is a major difference in our approaches, how we study that. From our perspective, the rates of disengagement are not that dramatic. And I'm wondering, is it due to the way you ask the question? Or it's very really a peculiarity of Serbian context. So it's an open question. I have some very speculative explanations, interpretation for that. But from our perspective, at least 65% of those who ended up in Serbia, they were civically or politically active back in Russia before exit. Although around 2/3 of them demobilized after emigration. And this is mostly due to emotional drainage because, well, people they basically experienced a lot of burnout, also changes their socioeconomic status because immigration is not tourism, unfortunately, for these people. So it brings about a lot of transaction costs. So majority of our respondents, they lost a lot in terms of their income. It's not like they impoverished, but basically they lost something. And if you lose money, basically, you also lose the capacity to engage elsewhere. So you need the resources to be civically and politically engaged. If you don't have resources, you disengage because you need to do something else, right? And majority, and here our numbers are pretty much the same as what Kristina and Srđan presented. So we have pretty much the same composition of gender composition, households, with whom people came to Serbia, is pretty much the same. So here I'm very happy and glad that you sort of confirmed our data too. So, and that's the good news. The only contradiction difference we see so far is the level of political activism. So what is also peculiar about Serbian context, for example, it seems like what is also very striking. So I was asked about surprises, the perception of safety. It really stands out here from your report. If we look at Outrage data, it's another international project that compares Russian diaspora across the globe. The fear of transnational repression is pretty much uniform across all Russian diasporas, and it's about 70–75%. And I wonder how these two things actually just add up. So people feel extremely secure and safe in Serbia. And I wonder, are we talking about safety in terms of say being secure or safe from crime in the streets, or just letting kids walk in the streets, as you mentioned in your report, or it's about political safety and security? And I wonder to what extent you're able to differentiate between these things in your report, because when it comes to transnational repression, people are super scared. So Russian diaspora is extremely paranoid about safety. And if we actually look at the data you actually presented, we have extremely large number of people who refuse to answer questions about Putin. If I'm not mistaken, it's 39.4%. This is enormous. It's at least the highest number of non-response rates I ever saw in the similar studies. And I wonder, is it a level of self-censorship that is dramatically higher than elsewhere, even Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, where, for example, political activism for foreigners and migrants is openly banned. And it's clearly not the case of Serbia. People are free to join any movement or NGO or nonprofits if they want to. So I wonder what is going on here, and do you have any idea what's the situation? Otherwise, I also was kind of stricken by the fact that from your sample, it looks like people are really like struggle to sort of make their ends meet and sort of like secure their future in Serbia. And finally, another piece of good news, probably, that sort of our findings coincide, overlap with yours in the sense that, yes, majority of Russians, they intend to stay in Serbia, given the fact that Serbian passport is a very strong one, and it also offers a very unique combination when it comes to travel. For example, it offers visa-free travel to China, which is a very rare opportunity for many passports worldwide. And also it can travel to the European Union. So with all this in hand, let me stop here. I have much more comments, of course, and I would be happy to elaborate.
Thank you, Margarita. You already tackled things for the second round, so maybe you should add less in the second round than Srđan and Maxim. But the second round is for going deeper into politics and questions about political attitudes, fears, or willingness of Russian immigrants to participate in political life, whether in Serbia or at some point in Russia. You saw on this PowerPoint presentation that the answers to some political questions are almost diametrically opposed between Russians in Serbia and those in Russia. For example, I will just put this one from Levada poll from June 2024, 74% of Russians living in Russia thought that things in their country were going in the right direction, whereas only 12.5% of those in Serbia share their opinion, for example, and not to go in other. So let's start, Srđan, with a question about politics, but how do you interpret the perspective of Russian immigrants in Serbia on Serbia? Because from their responses on political questions, we get a picture not only of their views on Russia, but also their views on Serbia. And for me, it was a little bit strange. They're opposing Putin, but they have a positive view of the current political situation in Serbia. So what factors shape their perception, and to what extent do you think fear of potential repercussions in Serbia influences these responses?
Yeah, thank you. And I think your question also relates to what Margarita was saying about this striking difference between the number of people who said that they weren't involved in any kind of political activity or activism since they came here. Basically, we were able to cross answers to questions on how if the Russians view the system in Serbia positively or negatively with their support, for example, to Vladimir Putin. And we saw that, okay, the minority here supports Putin, about 16%. But out of those, almost 56% view the situation in Serbia positively, and a minority of 12% view it negatively. Out of the larger group of people, which is almost 50% that do not support Putin, you have a more balanced view. 36% of people see Serbia, the political situation in Serbia positively, and 30% of people see it negatively. So you see that there is something there. Now, the reasons behind that, we can speculate about it. I think, there is a lot in the comparative perspective. Russians come from Russia, and then, even Vučitić's authoritarian regime, to them, at least personally, seems like, democracy, So, so there is a little bit of that. But I think there is a more sinister explanation to some of the things, which, Margarita was asking why such a striking number of Russians in Serbia, fear to answer to certain politically sensitive questions. And maybe this influences also their answer when they were asked, have you been involved in some form of political or civic activities? Because in that multiple choice question, we didn't have an option as far as maybe I'm mistaken, but I think I don't, that I don't want to respond, you know. So maybe then no, I haven't was a choice for those who didn't want to respond on questions on Putin, on the war in Ukraine. So I'm not excluding that we cannot know. But I think in Serbia you have double fear. You have fear from the long arm of the Kremlin here, but you also have fear from local security services and the regime. So I think this probably motivates a lot of them, not motivated a lot of them not to answer the certain.
Okay, thank you. I have also a question about fear to Maxim. How do you interpret their reluctance to speak about sensitive topics like Putin and aggression in Ukraine, and their hesitance to participate in anti-war or anti-regime protests in Serbia? Because regarding political or civic engagement after leaving Russia, the vast majority, 72.8%, reported no involvement in such activities. And there is a good illustration of one answer, female, 40 to 49 years old. I won't give any assessments. We must be very careful with these topics. And on the other hand, why do they seem more open to LGBT activism? Because it seems from these questionnaires and answers that it's easier to participate in this kind of activism, but not in political one. And what does it mean to have actually two Russias in Serbia, which is also one of the chapters of this publication?
I think the LGBT activism is rather perceived as a social issue, not so that much political. So it's not seen as direct opposition to the regime, as a direct challenge to the regime. While all issues concerning the anti-regime protest, I think Srđan is absolutely right, that people just, they don't want to risk. They have already had to abandon the country they live in and move to another one. They don't want to repeat it once again, and they'd rather avoid getting involved in this stuff. Though I'm pretty sure that it might change when they got a better status in Serbia, more adapted to the current situation. And given that many of them, as Margarita mentioned, were involved in politics in Russia, they are likely to get involved in the local politics as well as soon as they feel safe and kind of legally protected by citizenship or whatever. Yeah, also, you were asking that...
fear, you know.
Fear, yeah. I'd rather downplay that. I think many of them, of course there are fears of the long Russian arm, which are, in my opinion, over-exaggerated, and the extent of cooperation probably not that omnipresent. There is cooperation for sure, but they're not like going after everybody. I also think that there are people who just, they don't want to speak about that. They've had enough of that in Russia. They have enough of Putin, war, all this discourse. They'd rather have it away from their lives. They have moved to Serbia to have it away from their lives. And they don't want to resume this discussion and discuss whether Putin is good or bad, whether the war in Ukraine is good or bad. They want to live their peaceful, personal, petit bourgeois life and just leave them alone. I'd rather I don't want to be involved in that. I think that it was a high proportion of people who responded that I don't want to discuss that. They don't mean not that I'm afraid to discuss it, but I just don't want to discuss it.
Okay, thank you. Margarita, actually, question for you that was almost answered in the first round. If you want to add something, how do you see their non-willingness to engage in activism compared to countries that you analyzed?
Yeah, first of all, thank you to your response. Also, with kind of trying to sort of square what how I interpret this data. So actually, I partly agree with Maxim. So people are sick and tired of politics. That's true. But also the people's perception of transnational repression, these are perceptions. They do not reflect the real capacity of the Kremlin to reach out to these people, right? And Kremlin does everything possible to instigate fear. Sometimes you don't need to spell out this fear, but it's kind of, is implied. It's like based on our interviews, it's like, an elephant in the room. People make jokes, they have a very dark sense of humor, how they describe this information. But yes, there is like overall fatigue. That's clearly the case. But it's also like, very like cautious stance towards, being politically active without having passports, even a residence permit. It also sounds like a pretty reckless enterprise. So in this case, I think it's a combination of all that what both of you mentioned. So just it's confirmed by the data we have from Serbia, at least. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And third round before questions and answers is because I really find this promising title, Non-Malign Influence. So let's go into the future. Let's talk about visions of future. And Srđan, you said that it is most striking for you and also for one of the things, not only one, is that fact that given that 40.2% plan to stay in Serbia for the next 5 years, how do you interpret not only their future here based on research findings, but also their interactions with Serbian society? Because many of people living in Serbia are perceiving immigrants like kind of parallel society. So do you think that there would be a chance for integration, or bigger integration with this 5-year plan? Let's use Soviet terminology, 5-year plan of staying.
Yeah, I actually think there is a great chance for integration. You mentioned this experience from post-October Revolution, immigration of the White Russians here, and I think, probably those that didn't go somewhere else after the kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes and Kingdom of Yugoslavia, they stayed and they assimilated completely. I have neighbors who are originally White Russians. They don't even speak Russian. So, you mentioned many things like architecture. Yeah. Serbia wouldn't have comic books if they weren't for the White Russians, for example. At that time,
well, it would, yeah.
At that point of the 20th century, we were predominantly an agricultural society, and these Russians brought a lot to this country. Then, I think there is a fair chance of this happening again. Russians may give an impression that they are a parallel society here. When you look at them from the outside, maybe it tells something about them, maybe it tells something about us, but the numbers show that the situation is completely different. Yeah. 81% of them feel well adapted to the Serbian life, to the life in this country. 74% started learning Serbian. And what is interesting is that it's even more pronounced with those people who are married or are couples with children. And I think this has a lot to do with the fact that their children go to school, and then, there is a huge interaction with Serbian parents, staff, and so on. So it kind of gets faster. And 77% have already Serbian friends and acquaintances. So I think, it's a rather new community. It takes time, but I think all the chances, all the conditions are there for good integration and, assimilation as well.
Thank you, Srđan. Maxim, the same question about the role of Russian diaspora, but both in Serbia and maybe Russia.
The one on Russia, I think, is easy to answer, that most of them will not risk, again, returning
in 5 years. Maybe we should be positive. Things are going to change.
No, actually, I can tell you from my own experience that changing a country you live in is quite traumatic experience, and you don't want to repeat it just for fun, because you can. I'm also fascinated about the future, because actually we may get a situation when Russians will become the most important national minority in Serbia. Because, if we look at this, the amount of residency permits issued, we see that there is no decrease in 2024, even though all the push factors were already over long before that. So we may see that the number of Russians will continue to increase in Serbia, given that even the current community creates huge connections. Between, Serbia, I don't know, it's also would be interesting to see how many Russians have been to Serbia before this war and after that. And I think it also has multiplier, that there is 100,000 Russians currently in Serbia, but there is also like 1 million who visited Serbia because they have friends or relatives there now. I agree with Srđan. I think that also surprising was how many of people are integrating, how many are studying the language, how many already have Serbian friends. And that's normal because it's quite a young community, well-educated, and they are eager to adapt to the local realities. And as soon as they get citizenship, I think we may expect very, very interesting developments here with this quite significant community, which we may change a lot in Serbian politics.
Thank you. And Margarita, also, do you see any potential for change in Russia with the Russian diaspora? You see these results from Serbia, but also comparing it to another results, do you see them permanently being somewhere else, or do you see them as factor of change in Russia?
I think what would be very helpful for us to understand the role of Russians in exile or Russian diaspora or diasporas, some people call them transnational community. Well, I think what is important for us to understand, so all the key players are inside Russia. And whoever is outside are sort of cheerleaders at best. It's not like they're completely useless. It's not the case. They can contribute significantly by maintaining and upholding, for example, independent media, or trying to sort of like commemorate and take records of political prisoners. They can support political prisoners inside Russia, etc. So they can do very many useful things. They can help Ukraine, for God's sake. So big elephant in the room. But at the same time, they're not the main players in the game. So, but what is really important here is to look at the connections between those in exile, especially those in Serbia, and we see from the report that people keep ties with those staying in Russia. It's important from the political remittances point of view. People still translate politically relevant information back to their close ones. Grandmothers talking to a grandmom is not an empty sound, so it might be helpful in some cases, like in serving as an alternative source of information. But this is my quick reaction on the perspectives on what diaspora can do or how it can impact the domestic changes inside Russia. And just a quick note on what's going on in Serbia. So the number of friends, Serbian friends, and the language proficiency, actually these numbers are the highest compared to other surveys in other countries. So this was quite striking. I forgot to mention that responding to your first question, but I think it's a good sign when it comes to, I don't like the term assimilation or integration. Usually in migration studies, people call it like adaptation or settling down. And 3 years from the immigration point of view, it's nothing. So the second generation, the kids, they will be fluent in Serbian. The number of people who already are able to speak some Serbian is pretty impressive. For example, to compare with Armenian survey, I think none of our respondents learns Armenian. I mean, except of like saying hi and thanking people. So this is a real situation. And Serbia actually demonstrates a pretty different dynamic. So here I'm a bit more positive.
Okay, thank you very much. So I don't know, maybe if you have some final remarks after questions and after, but I think that we had a lot. So here is time for you to ask questions. Is there any question? Yes, please. I don't know what's you will get
online. Yeah, I'm not sure if okay, you can hear me, right? Is it hello? We can hear you. Yeah. Can you hear me? It's
yes.
I'm sorry. I was meant to be there in person, but my train got canceled, so I had to join online. My name is Peter Nikitin. I'm one of the organizers of the anti-war movement here in Serbia in 2022. I would like to make 3 points on this fascinating discussion that has taken place. First is the point on the quote from the Romanian comedian who claimed that no one moved when Putin annexed Crimea in 2014. Well, that's not true, because by 2022, there was already quite a sizable Russian diaspora here, and most of them moved precisely because of the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine. and the annexation of Crimea. It was, of course, not as large as the 2022 wave, but it was still a sizable wave. And according to the population census that was held in 2022, there were 10,000 Russians already living in Serbia in that year who came earlier, who obtained residence permits and stated in the census that they were Russian. The second point is on the comparison of the views of the diaspora with the views inside Russia based on Levada polls. I must say I very strongly disagree with this approach as such, because Russian opinion polls about what people think about Putin or the war mean absolutely nothing, in my opinion. Because saying that you are against Putin, against the war, or think the country is going in the wrong direction in an opinion poll is in Russia a punishable offense. So it's not surprising that the majority there, when approached by Levada or whoever, will say, oh yeah, we support everything. So, you know, in general, I would invite everyone to treat those results with a bit of, with a grain of salt, even though clearly the diaspora is more opposition-minded than people that stayed in Russia, but still we cannot today, based on opinion polls, even by allegedly independent organizations such as Levada, conclude what Russians in Russia think. We can't. And the third point, I'll be very short, is on political activism. I organized, along with other Russians who were already in Serbia before the beginning of the war, and those that arrived, I organized a large number of rallies in 22 and 23. The largest of which, according to the police, gathered 3,000 people in the streets in Russia. That was in Belgrade. That was in December 2022. However, there is now a policy of trying to expel people from Serbia. People are being refused residence permits because they participated in some anti-war activities. I believe in the room you have Mrs. Elena Koposova, who is one of the people in this situation, who is being denied the residence permit because she signed an anti-war letter. And this has had a very chilling effect. Just last week, I went to an Alexei Navalny commemoration event, which was attended by about 100 people, Russians, and everybody I spoke to were very, very much afraid to be there. And people were asking, there was public order police present, and people were afraid of those two policemen who were present there. And probably some of them left because they realized there was public order police present. So that should probably shed some light on why political activism responses are low. Thank you very much once again, and I hope both the study and the recording of this session will be made public at some point.
Thank you, Piotr. Yeah, thank you, Piotr, and it's nice to see you. I was reading about your activism, especially what you did with Vladimir Arsenievich and Crocodile, and it was really important and brave, and also about the case of, I forgot the name, the guy who was getting off Wagner murals, and he was expelled from Serbia. I forgot the name, sorry. But
in total, we're looking at maybe 10 cases that are in the public domain, but in reality, there are probably more cases because not everyone who were branded a threat to national security wanted to go public.
Yeah, thank you. Do you want to give some reply on Piotr's comments and then to hear your question?
No, just to confirm that Piotr is right. We have it in our study that the Serbian official census shows that, in 2022, there were 10,486 Russians already, which was a huge increase in comparison to 2011, where there were only 3,247. So yes, there was a sizable community. We know not only Piotr, but other people who came here. Some of them were fellows of our Safe Haven program of the Belgrade Centre for Security Policy. So, yes.
I also would like to say a few words in defense of Levada, which is, I think, using the word allegedly about their independence is inappropriate, because they are working under huge pressure from Russian authorities. They have been designed foreign agent, and they have been cooperating with various Western institutions until it was possible. They are doing a great job. Of course, there are distortions in the data they provide, which are created by the current hardening of repressive laws. But still, there is a strong consistency in the results they have. And it's not that before the war, there were 10% of Putin's support. And after the war, when it became more dangerous to express your opposition to Putin, it suddenly became 85. No, there was a consistency from the early years of Putin's rule. And we can't just disregard this data and say, oh, no, there is no 85 support for Putin. It's just, they are just threatened and all this stuff. No, there is a significant support, and maybe it's not 85. Maybe under different conditions, people would have been more skeptical, but still it reflects some reality.
Thank you. Now we have your question and then 3 questions. Just wait for a mic.
I'm Polina from the ARC project, and I just want to follow what Piotr said. Our colleague, our friend, Andrei Pivovarov was arrested and spent 3 years in a Russian prison just because Alexander Vulin recorded his conference here in Belgrade and shared this recording with the director of Russian FSB. And after that, our colleague, opposition Russian political, was arrested in Russia and spent 3 years in a Russian prison. It's not a heaven. And after that, all Russians know our political was arrested because of Serbian government member recording his personal meeting in Belgrade. How we can participate on a protest here, because we are in fear. And here is Yelena, who just stay only one signature under open letter against Russians against the war in Ukraine. And after that, she had huge troubles with her documents here in Serbia. Of course, we are in the biggest fear here.
Thank you.
Hi, Vladan from Embassy of Canada, political officer. Part of my question has been answered by Polina and by Piotr. The second question is to Maxim. Do you expect more Russians to come to Serbia, but not from Russia, but from, let's say, Armenia or Georgia, if they learn about the experiences of their peers from Serbia on the assumption that they communicate?
Yeah, maybe immediately. Just do you want to give a question?
Oh, okay. I can answer about the last one on going to Serbia. Yes, of course, because as Margarita has mentioned, for the very simple reasons that if you are Russian in Georgia or Russian in Armenia, there are very low chances for you to integrate into the local society and to get local citizenship. It is very difficult for cultural differences, for language differences, for all kind of stuff. And the prospects, even if you get the local citizenship, the local citizenship is not that, what are the merits of Armenian citizenship, in comparison to the Serbian one. While in Serbia, if you get a Serbian citizenship, these people are quite pragmatic, these Russians are quite pragmatic. You get a visa-free regime with the European Union, sooner or later, this passport may become the EU passport. You also got visa-free to China. There is a visa-free to Russia also. So you get a very nice set of advantages if you get a Serbian passport. So I do expect more Russians coming here, especially not from Russia itself, not that much from Russia itself, but from other diaspora communities which are not really that deep-rooted in the countries they've moved initially.
More questions?
Thank you. I have quite a specific question but maybe you can answer it. So it's known that there was an influx of Russian IT workers, IT professionals to Serbia. Did it have any qualitative impact on the IT sector here in Serbia, or is it mostly kind of isolated from what's happening in Serbia?
I can tell you that it's finally Serbia got the proper taxi application because of Russians coming here. It was impossible to get a taxi in Belgrade. It was such a horrible thing. But now you can easily get it. You can pay with Russian card. You can pay with European card, which whatever.
We have obviously data on which kind of work Russian diaspora here does, and IT is one of the predominant sectors, of course.
More question? Margarita, sorry. Sorry, Margarita.
Just jump in on the IT impact. So the majority of IT people, so it's like the majority of all Russians who came, at least according to our information, but many of them also employed for international companies, not domestic Serbian companies. So it's not like they pay taxes in Serbia, okay, depending on the arrangements, right, and how their contractual obligations go. But depending on who's paying the money, also sort of like create incentives for these people to integrate or not to integrate. So, and this is why we also see this isolated ecosystem, because people get the money from national companies mostly. So yeah, so integration is a bit more limited than I would expect.
Thank you.
If it's possible, and with your permission, I would just like to clarify the point about sociological researches in Russia and Levada Center, but only if you allow me.
Well, it would be good to have more questions. Yeah, I don't know about panelists. They're not willing to answer, or just wait to see how it develops here.
Of course.
Yes, please introduce yourself just to know where we're talking to.
I am Frederick Damgaard from the Danish Embassy. I think it was interesting that you talked a little about how the Russian community here might influence politics in the future. And I was wondering, now that you mentioned the 20s and the 30s and the previous experience and the cultural effects that had. So I was wondering if you could put some words on how this new influx of Russian citizens might also affect the cultural affairs and other societal aspects in Serbia today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I suppose it's a question for me. Okay. So yeah, it was really interesting. Now I knew about Russian immigrants and their life in interwar period, but it was completely different context. Now reading again everything, and for example, there was a great PhD thesis about interwar period and then about the role of Russian immigrants on a music life of Serbia or Kingdom of Yugoslavia, but Belgrade certainly. And the girl who wrote that PhD thesis, she works in Musicology Institute of Serbia and Academy of Arts and Sciences. And she told me that it is the same thing, that there is a parallel world going on in cultural life of Russians in Belgrade that we don't know about. She knows because she was working on that topic and she became familiar, but we still don't know nothing about it. Maybe I would like to go to enjoy some of these cultural offers. Unfortunately, here we come again on this parallel society problem, which is not parallel in all spheres of life. Kafana or restaurant or cafes, this is something that we can say changed completely Belgrade. This Russian scene of cafes and restaurants, this is something that is visible, but it would be better, to be more visible in other spheres of life. Otherwise, I still think that there is not so much space for interaction, especially in culture, and this is my idea. And on the other hand, now I will go back to what I research, Russian propaganda. This is other topic, and what is coming from Russia these last 2 years. So I would prefer to see more cultural things from Russians who are here since 2022 than from Russians coming from Russia since 2022.
Maybe just, and this is not from the study, I want to underline that, it's just the intuitive impression of mine is that there are more Russians going to Serbian cultural events than vice versa, which is kind of logical because there are more Serbian offers. But if you go to a theater in Serbia, for example, there will always be a Russian sitting kind of somewhere nearby, you know.
But I will add on that, because comparing with interwar period. In interwar period, in main daily newspaper, which were Politika, Pravda, and Vreme, you have, especially in Politika and Vreme, who had really rich columns on cultural and everyday life in Belgrade, you can always find what is going on that evening in all spheres of cultural and social life. So you can find, you know, what Russians are playing, you know, like old kafana songs, or have concerts or ballet dance. Now, as a citizens of Belgrade, I don't see anything, you know, what's going on.
It's an idea for the local media, you know, to enlarge their readers.
Yes, please.
All right, Niklas Likvist, Embassy of Finland. You mentioned that the answers you had, 85% of them live in Belgrade. What about the remaining 15%? Does the study give you any indications? Is there a difference between these two groups? And the other one is, I know, or I've been told by UN representatives in Montenegro that a lot of Russians moved from Montenegro to Serbia because they changed requirements for residence permits and registering companies in Montenegro. Did this show any information about this in your study?
Thank you for your question. So apart from Belgrade, almost everybody else lives in Novi Sad, and there is a very 12%. There is only 3% living elsewhere in Serbia. We don't have this data on the transfer of people from Montenegro to Serbia. We also heard about it, but you know, we were not able to get such specific data from the police. It's all virtually impossible. They don't have demographic data of this community. They don't have anything, or at least maybe they have it, but they're not ordering in the way that would allow them to respond to a FOIA request in a good way.
One moving from Montenegro. I have only anecdotal evidence of that, but it is indeed happening, because for the very simple reason that Belgrade is a city, while in Montenegro you live on a sea resort or in a village, and people just, if they want to live there, not just spend their vacations, they are choosing a big city to live in because of all the offers of big city.
Do we have more questions? Can we then conclude? Thank you. Thank you very much. I really think that you will find this research very useful. I can say, as a historian and as someone who is working on this topic on Russians in Serbia since 2022, it is very, very useful, and use it. When is it going to be official and public?
It should already be online, so on our website. It is. Okay.
Go ahead and use it. Thank you very much.